Greetings, Bhagavatam lovers. Today we get the keys to the riddle from Shukdev. So he's going to decode the riddle of the wilderness. It's quite excellent. We are only covering 2 texts today, but they're very long. So, Sahovacha, he said. He himself said, so that means Shuka said. So it's no more Bharata. Now it's Shuka explaining what Bharata said. Sa esha dehatma maninam. So this means the main character is the one who thinks the body is the self. So the main character is the merchant. And what does the merchant represent? He represents somebody, a regular person like you or I. And that person is described as dehatma. Maninam. Actually, it's plural, right? Let's say it like this. Represents those who think the body is the self. Deha is body and Atma is self. Dehatma means to consider the body the self. Manina, your consideration. So that's what the merchant in the story is. Sattva guna vishesha vikalpita kushala. Him seeking ways to maintain himself, etc., represents people's interest in many good or bad deeds. So in the story, there's a merchant who's interested in Rajas, Tamas, Sattva, Karmana. The ways to maintain himself, Sattva. The ways to increase his profits, Rajas, and the ways to decrease his losses, Tamas. And he says, so Shuka explains that part of the story represents how people are interested in many different good or bad deeds. There's a lot of... It's obviously way better to know Sanskrit than it is to get a translation of it, no matter how good the... Well, usually, no matter how good the translation is. But I'll try to explain the different nuances. Kushala, kushala. Kushala means good. Akushala means not good, or happy and unhappy. So people have vikalpita. Vishesh vikalpita, very special interest in kushala and akushala, in good things and bad things. They have very special interest in getting good things and avoiding bad things. And that's why they're interested in sattva guna. In the story, the sattva guna is the way of the merchant to maintain himself, increase his profits and decrease his losses. But what it represents is the way people are interested in maintaining their existence in the world, expanding their existence in the world, or decreasing their existence in the world. Decrease from what? Decrease from akushala. Decrease from undesired things. Expand to what? Expand to kushala. Expand into the things that they like. Retract from the things they don't like. And maintain themselves, sattva. Samavahara vinirmita vividha devavalabhi viyoga samyogadi anadi samsara anubhavasya. This is the first thing that was an eye opener for me. Shuka Dev caught this meaning, which is quite brilliant, which I missed. The mixture of these deeds, actually, it's going to come out in the next thing a little bit, just how cool this is. It's very cool. We didn't really know exactly what this road was. I never said anything about the road, but he's going to explain what this road is. It's very cool. So anyway, right here he says, the mixture of these deeds is the beginningless cause of our existence as a sequence of bodies that we perceive ourselves giving up, accepting, and living in. So it hasn't related to anything in the story yet. But spilling the beans and spoiling the surprise, it's going to be related to the road. So he says, people the interest that the merchant has in the ways to expand his business represents the interest that everybody has in the ways of trying to enjoy the world and avoid unhappiness. The mixture of avoiding or not avoiding happiness or unhappiness and the activities that are good or bad, the mixture of those things is the beginningless cause of our existence as a sequence of bodies that we perceive ourselves giving up, accepting, and living in. Some of ahara means the way these things mix together. The way what mixes together? Kushala, from the previous line. The way the good and the bad mixes together, which means the good and the bad in the world and also the good and the bad in our deeds. The way our good and bad deeds mix together is vinirmita. It's the cause of vividha, all different kinds of deha, bodies. Remember, the merchant in this story is dehatma, money, the one who thinks that he is a particular body. But the actions that he performs puts him in different bodies. So he's quite confused about who he is. The mixture of these deeds is the beginning. Let's go. Vinirmita vivida deha avalibi. Deha avalibi. A sequence of bodies. Just like we have a sequence of actions. The sequence of actions produces a sequence of effects. And the effects create our conditions and the way we exist. And the central point for how we exist in our conditions is our body. So, because the merchant is interested in expanding his business, he performs a lot of deeds which then affect his business. And change his office and so on. But the description of the bodies is interesting. Vinirmita vividha devalibi. This is the cause for all the various, for the various string or sequence of bodies. Viyog, samyog, adi. You know, yoga means to link together, to join. Viyog means separate, and samyog means bring together. Adi, etc. So actually, viyog is tamas, samyog is rajas, and adi is sattvas. To bring things together is to create, to take things apart is to destroy, and to hold them in one of those two states is to maintain or exist, the sattva. So the sequence of bodies, we do some yoga to a particular body. We may not be aware of this in our daily life, just like we're not aware of breathing. We breathe automatically. But actually, there's a part of the subconscious mind which is holding on to these various aspects of identity that root us into the body. And just like we're unaware of regulating a heartbeat or blood flow or oxygen intake by breathing, similarly, we're unaware of this fact that the part of the intellect and mind is keeping us in contact with the body, the samyog. And then there's viyog, which means death when we give it up. Death or sleep, anesthesia, when the connection is dissolved. But it's described as a viyog, samyog, samsara. Samsara means a complete circuit of creation. So you go samyog into one form, means viyog from another form. And then the viyog from this form means samyog to another form. That's samsara. And what is the cause of samsara? It's sattvadi guna vishesha vikalpita kushala. It's the good and the bad motivations that arise from the desires based on the stuff that's available in the world. Anadi. Anadi. Adi means beginning. Anadi means without a beginning. So this is a chain of cause and effect. Nirmita, but it's vinirmita. It's without an ultimate cause. It's just based on the very personality or the very nature or the very dharma of this Dehatma Mani person, the person who thinks that they're a body, that they, from the very beginning, with the very beginning, without a prior condition, anadi, they engage in activities through their body. There's no previous state. They weren't doing something without the body and then suddenly fell into a body or wandered into a body. And the whole thing is described by the word anubhava, anubhavasya. By virtue of believing or thinking or concluding, by virtue of some kind of an anubhav, by virtue of some kind of a thought process, by virtue of some sort of thought process, we accept one physical condition and give up another one. So this is I directly experienced this when I was in anesthesia and coming out of anesthesia. You can directly experience this if you wake up slowly and you have some awareness about what it feels like when you wake up. What you'll experience is that there's an anubhava. You have to cognize, you have to become aware of and think of who you are. You know that you're something and someone, but you don't know who. And you have to figure it out and then agree to it. That's called the anubhav. So the mixture of these deeds is the beginningless cause of our existence as a sequence of bodies that we perceive ourselves giving up, accepting, and living in. Now let's read the next line. But first let's just catch the... Shuka said the main character represents those who think the body is the self. Him seeking ways to maintain himself, etc., represents people's interest in many different good and bad deeds. The mixture of these deeds is the beginningless cause of our existence as a sequence of bodies that we perceive ourselves giving up, accepting, and living in. And then he says, Dvara bhutena shad indriya vargena tasmin durgadvat. Durgadvavat. The long, difficult road in the story is this transmigration. Its gateway is the collection of 6 sensory powers. So what is the road in the story? This is the amazing... So far, this is a new thing that Shuka is giving us, a new idea. In the story, the merchant is traveling on this road through the forest. What's the road? The road represents samsara and the transmigration from one form to another, a progress from one body to the next. When I told my daughter the story, she said, "Did he become a monkey?" Oh no, I said, "There's a problem with living with the monkeys," and she said, "Because he's not a monkey, right?" So it made us ask each other this question: did he become a monkey? So it just, he's living with birds, he's living with monkeys, because as he's moving down the road, he's changing his form. So that's what the road represents. The road represents the transmigration. And then also in the story, we didn't notice, by ourselves we didn't notice, but in the very beginning, when he finds himself on the road, he sees the entry to the forest. The road has a gateway into the forest. That's the Dwara Bhutena, the gateway into this existence. And what is that? Shadindriya Vargena. It's not any particular sense. Indriya means sense. This is the Shad Indriya Varga. Shadvarg, Saptvarg, Dashvarg, Dwadashvarg, for your astrology buffs. Varga means collection of things. Collecting all the amshas into one chart is called the Varga. Shad Indriya Varga Ena is the way that he goes through the gateway into the forest. That's because the way that we go into the world and into the bodies that we inhabit on the road is through this collective sensory power called the Shadindriya Varga, which is basically the collective interface to the senses, which is basically the buddhi, the intellect. All right, good stuff, right? Is he saying that the soul never existed from the... Interesting question. Nomadic says, is he saying that the soul never existed from the very beginning except as a sequence of bodies? Wording it this way is confusing. Because is he saying that the soul never existed? No, but that's not what you're saying. The soul did not have some other existence prior to existing on this road. This is what he's saying. By its very nature, it manifests itself in the sequence of bodies, beginninglessly. And it is not just him who's... Shuka is not the only one saying this is the conclusion of all the Upanishads and the Vedanta, and it's not just being said here, it's being said all the time. You just see how many times you see the word anadi come up. Yes, Shad means 6, Mr. Eddie. Now, Shuka said the main character represents those who think the body is the self. Him seeking ways to maintain himself, etc., represents people's interest in many different good and bad deeds. The mixture of these deeds is the beginningless cause of our existence as a sequence of bodies that we perceive ourselves giving up, accepting, and living. And we just perceive it. But we're not actually giving up and accepting these bodies. We're not actually in the bodies. Excuse me. The long, difficult road is this transmigration. Its gateway is the collection of 6 sensory powers. Now this next part. Asugame dhvani apatita ishvarasya bhagavata Vishnu. He was set on this difficult path as we are set on it by the Master Bhagavan Vishnu, which means Paramatma. The Ishvara, Vishnu, is Paramatma. He's described as Bhagavan because he's the aspect of Bhagavan. But what specific aspect? He's Vishnu's aspect of Bhagavan as Ishvara. That means as Paramatma. Now it said apatita. Pata means to fall. So he's been put upon this path, apatita. Anadi apatita. It's not that he fell from some other condition or had something before that, but he's put upon this path. That's what the word apatita means. He's put on this path. He's set on this path. What does that signify? That signifies how the Paramatma places us on the road, on the pathway by which we can exist. So Paramatma is the one that places the jiva into contact with the external energy through which we can exist. Any questions about that? It's not the Paramatma who is the cause of our existence. The Paramatma is the facilitator of the existence. This is very clear from all the analogies where they say there are 2 birds in a tree and one eats the fruit and the other doesn't. The Paramatma is a neutral party and he doesn't exert any will. But he's the facilitator of the will of the individual. So it's not that the Paramatma takes a person and sticks him on a path. But the person is facing the path and wants to get to the path, but they have no means. Because they're just consciousness. They don't have any agents. They don't have any instruments to express their agency. So the Paramatma is the facilitator that gives the agent, the soul, contact to the instrumentation so that they can express their agency. Any questions about that? On the road again. Very good one. Alf, is Paramatma all-knowing? Yes. Alf asks. Okay. If there's any more questions about that, I'll come back to it. So, again, see how long this first verse is? It's not even a verse. Wow, it's very long. Okay, so let's review it. Shuka says the main character represents those who think the body is the self. Him seeking ways to maintain himself represents people's interest in many different good and bad deeds. The mixture of these deeds is the beginningless cause of our existence, as a sequence of bodies that we perceive ourselves giving up, accepting, and living in. The long, difficult road in the story is this transmigration. Its gateway is the collection of the 6 powers, sensory powers. He was set on this difficult path as we are set on it by the Master Bhagavan Vishnu. Vasha Vartinya Mayaya Jiva Loko Ayam Yatha Vanik Sartah Artapara. His compulsion to travel represents how all people are compelled by their delusions, and this is why he is a, quote, profit-seeking merchant. Compulsion to travel was a difficult one to translate. Vasha Vartinya. Vartmana, Parivartana yoga in astrology. Varta means to move, to kind of rotate or revolve or something. It's a Varta. So, but Vasha means to control something. So Vasha Vartinya means moving like a puppet. Compulsion to travel, I might change it to moving like a puppet. The story didn't really literally say the story says he's forced or compelled. He's compelled to enter the forest. He's not forced by another entity to enter the forest but the gateway to the forest compels him to enter it, even though it seems dangerous. So what does that represent in the story? It represents Mayaya Jiva Loko Yamyata. It represents how all people are compelled by their delusions. It represents how Maya, or delusion, makes the Jiva Loka, the whole world of people, Vasha Vartinya. The reason why this merchant is said to have kind of been forced into movement or moved into movement, or compelled by his perception, is because all of this merchant represents people who believe that their existence is physical and emotional, mental. So then the conditions of the physical, emotional reality is what compels the jiva to move. So the actions are not expressing free will. Our actions are not expressive of free will. It's not that free will doesn't exist or we don't have will, but our actions are not expressive of our will. Our actions are expressive of our compulsions and addictions and desires, which are vash. They control our vartana, our movements. So if you want to do real exercise, don't bother going to the gym and sticking iron on a bar and trying to lift it. If you want to do real exercise, just try to not move in the way that you're pushed by your habit and by your compulsion to move. When you feel compelled to eat when you're not hungry, try not to. That's real exercise. That's a real workout. When you feel compelled to insult somebody or laugh at somebody, ridicule somebody, try not to. When you feel compulsed to flatter somebody or kiss up to somebody, try not to. When you feel compulsed to be fearful, try not to. When you feel compulsed to do something, try not to. That's real exercise. And that will build real strength, which is called Shakti. If real Shakti-shali is not a big muscular person, real Shakti-shali is a tapasvi, a person who can control themselves, control their compulsions, because that person gains access to will. And when you have access to will, then you become a magician. In the true, not a trickster magician, but a true siddha. A true person who's able to act and do and accomplish what they actually desire. Let's see if there's any questions here. Good. Cheesecake, an appropriate name, Cheesecake 358. Does that mean that if he controlled the sixth sensory powers, there'd be no compulsion to travel? Or he might find a different road, one that doesn't lead through a gateway of external perception. We don't know yet. Well, from the analogy, hasn't ventured to express yet. But later it will say, if you can get, the road can also lead out of the forest into a different place. But that gateway would have to be the opposite of the gateway that led into it. So it's not that by controlling the six senses you will simply cease to travel or move, which is what the Advaitavadis say. He will cease to move in the forest, but he will move into it on a different path out of the forest. 42nd Street. Does it represent will in some way? I'm not sure what it means. Is emotion the main delusion? The main delusion... No, emotion is not a cause. Emotion is not a fundamental cause. Emotion is like a tertiary cause. The fundamental illusion is the projection of the identity onto the physical circumstances. The projection of the identity through the gateway is the fundamental cause of the whole existence. It's the main delusion. That's why the gateway into the forest is called Shad-Varga-indriya. Shad-indriya Varga. The insertion of the conscious being into the externally oriented sensual perceptions is the fundamental, and emotions arise tertiarily from that. So primarily from that arises ahankar, a sense of who I am. And then from the ahankar arises a sense of what I want, desire. And from the desire arises a sense of how I feel, which is emotion. What's a good practice to, Yellow Crystal Warrior says, what's a good practice to maintain awareness of our compulsions? I don't know that it requires a practice because it's nonstop. There's infinite compulsions and they're nonstop. It doesn't require any practice to notice them. All that we should really do is take notes of the ones that we feel are non-productive. Pick out start with one that we think is the most annoying, or the most counterproductive, or not like the person that we want to be, and focus on that. Bardo asked, does he mean that there are two ways to address the source? I don't know who. There's too many pronouns. You guys have to realize when you write questions that if you use pronouns, I'm going to see your message long after you wrote it. So I don't know. So does that mean Shukadev, or does that mean somebody else in the live chat? Does he mean that there are two ways to address the source, Ishvara and Brahman? So I don't know what statement you're referring to. And it's not obvious to me. Maybe it must be this statement. Asugamedvan yapatita ishvarasya bhagavato Vishnu. So from this you might think, there's no Brahman mentioned there. There's Ishvara, Bhagavata, and Vishnu mentioned. But the grammar in the thing is Bhagavata is nominative, Vishnu is nominative, and Ishvara is instrumental. So it means Bhagavan and Vishnu is one concept, and then Ishvara is as the instrumental concept, so it means Bhagavan and Vishnu acting as the Ishvara, so it means Paramatma. Nomadic Son asks, so when we feel sad at the injustice and suffering in the world, it arises from the misidentification of the soul. Of course, but it doesn't matter. Of course, but it doesn't mean that it's... So the illusion that we're having is not unreal. It's just inaccurate. And our participation in the illusion is our participation in it. So the anger at injustice and so forth is a delusion, but it's not an unproductive delusion. That's why I say you should separate the productive from the unproductive delusions. Dharma is a productive delusion. And to perform one's duties and responsibilities and to better oneself and to increase one's awareness is a productive delusion. It's a delusion to even gain knowledge. But that's a productive delusion. It's also a delusion to gain ignorance, but that's a destructive delusion, so we should avoid that one. So I was just reading the story of Vashishta and Kalmashapra and Shakti, this big elaborate story. And so the basic moral of the story is people who want revenge. And I just think that I need to post this to share this quote from the person, because they give a very powerful thing. You know the band Rage Against the Machine? Your anger is a gift. That thing, the rage against the machine is a good thing. That's a very good concept. It's a very moral concept. So in the Mahabharata, this person, I think it's Urvash, he said he's a Brahmin in the Bhrigu's dynasty, and then the Bhrigu, he's going to destroy the world. He wants to destroy the world because of the injustices. And the ancestors to whom the injustices were performed come to him and ask him not to do that. And they explained that they weren't injustices. We deserved and wanted those things. And the world exists for that reason. So you shouldn't destroy the world. But he says something very important when he's explaining himself to them. He says that anger at injustice should not be given up, because crime which goes unpunished gets repeated. And crime is not good for anyone, neither the victim nor the perpetrator. So anger shouldn't be shunned when it's anger at an actual injustice. So sadness at the injustice and suffering in the world is a delusion, but it's a dharmic delusion, it's a productive delusion, so we should not give it up. However, a person who has completed the Dharma and been purified by the Dharma and has no more impulse to action, they can give that up. And they can become unmoved because they see the whole thing as a game, as a video game, as a simulation. Just like if you play these online video games, you see people killing innocent other people in the game, and it's disturbing. And then they say, but it's just a game. That concept that is just a game, first of all, it's not just a game, it's your mind. And you're performing negative activities with your mind in the game. But on another level, it's true, it is just a game. So when the person evolves to the level where they actually perceive that the world is just a simulation, or it's just like an enclosed system in which karma is it's not a simulation, but it's an enclosed system in which karmas are interacting with other karmas, like the Brigus said. This was meant to happen, it's supposed to happen, don't get mad about it. Then on that level, the actual sannyasi, the actual vairagi, they give up sadness and anger. But we shouldn't. Okay. So that was a long detour, but I think it was worth it. But to get back on track, let's reread this, and then go to the next statement. He said, the main character represents those who think the body is the self. Him seeking ways to maintain himself and so on represents people's interest in many good and bad deeds. The mixture of these deeds is the beginningless cause of our existence as a sequence of bodies that we perceive ourselves giving up, accepting, and living in. The long, difficult road is this transmigration, and its gateway is the collection of 6 sensory powers. He was set on this difficult path as we are set on it by the Master Bhagavan Vishnu, Paramatma. His compulsion to travel, or the way that he moves by force, represents how all people are compelled by their delusions. This is why he is a profit-seeking merchant. That's why the story describes him as a profit-seeking merchant. Swadeha nishpadita karmanubhava smashanavat ashivatmayam samsaratavyam gata. Swadeha nishpadita karmanubhava smashanavat ashivatmayam sangsar artavyam gata. The many upsetting and fatal things he encountered after entering that wild forest of existence represents the results we experience by our self-centric, body-centric efforts. So here, in this one sentence, he gives a summary of the whole story. The summary of everything that happens after he enters the forest. All kinds of stuff happens, and it's not a really happy story. I was surprised that my daughter sat there and listened to the whole story. Usually when it's a depressing story, she's like, Daddy, tell me another story. But it's not like a happy tale. He gets bit by insects over here. He gets attacked by a monster over there. He gets eaten by a snake over here. He falls in a hole over there. He gets stung by bees over there. He gets hungry. He gets cold. There's like 2 or 3 happy things in the whole story with like 800 other negative things. So his basic summary is all that stuff that happened in the forest basically represents all the stuff that happens to us. So he says, Swadeha nishpadita karma anubhava. Swadeha, deha is the body. Swadeha means one's own body. Nishpadita, with one's own body as the basis. Karma. The deeds that we perform, karma, on the basis of nishpadita, swadeha, our own separated, individualized, individualistic body. In other words, what benefits me? This man is called a profit-seeking merchant. Why is he described as a profit-seeking merchant? Because that's the nature of living things. They seeking their own fortune. We're all seeking our own fortune. And so we're acting on the basis of our fortune. Swadeha nishpadita. We're acting to benefit our business, and we want our competitor's business to go out of business. We want the other kings to die. We want the other men to look ugly. We want the other women to look ugly. We want the other students in the class to forget the answers. And we want to be the only one that remembers the answer. We want to sell the product, and we want the other people to not sell anything anymore, so everybody can buy our product. So that basis of karma by which the swadeha nishpadita, by which oneself benefits, that's the reason for all the bad stuff that happens in the world. That's symbolized by his profit-seeking nature leading him into just a big long tail of woe. Shmashanavat. Shmashana is a crematorium, a funeral pyre. Shmashanavat means like fatal, fatality, things dying, very deadly, very unhappy. A place where people cry, Shmashanavat, Shmashanavat. Ashivatam. Ashivata. Shiva means peaceful. Shiva means nice, auspicious. Ashiva. Turn that concept around. Unpeaceful, disturbing. What did I say? Upsetting. Ashivata. Samsara. This samsara, or this existence, is mayam. It's composed of ashivatva, smashanavat. It's composed of upsetting things, like funerals. Smashanavat. That's what happens in the Atavam, in that wild forest, when he goes in there. Let us see. Alf says, Vic, you say we are all seeking self-gratification, but what if we are not? What if we are seeking to do it for others? Which others? Maybe for your kids. Why your kids? Is there something special about the carbon atoms in your kids? Maybe for the people that believe the things that you believe. Is there something special about the brain waves and the patterns about what you believe? Why is it always related to you? My family, my children, my wife, my husband, my company. How is that any different than my penis? My face? It's not any different. My car. Oh, there was a car crash in the parking lot. Did it hit my car? No. Whew. Why? Why is your car different than the other person's car? Because it's your car. So we think, I'm not selfish because I care about my religion, I care about my philosophy, I care about my economic theory, I care about my science, I care about my career, I care about my country, I care about my world. The word my is always in there. So how can we say that we're not selfish? If we are not selfish, then we would not have any of these problems. Swadeha nishpadita karma anubhava. The resulting experience from swadeha nishpadita karma, from selfish action, is smashanavat, a life that looks like a funeral. Problems, wars, conflicts, arguments, distress, ashivata. But the only person only the person who is actually not selfish won't feel any distress. Your coworker got a promotion. That's great. You feel happy for him. So Vanna asks, so everything, all the bad has to be here so we learn? Otherwise, why is it necessary, basically? The bad, there's really no such thing as bad experience, although it depends upon your context and how big your how wide your angle lens is. In a small consideration, something is good and something is bad. But in a bigger consideration, what's bad in the small consideration might be good. For example, to get your finger chopped off is bad. But the next day when somebody comes looking for a human sacrifice and they skip over you because you had your finger chopped off, then having had your finger chopped off was good. Yeah. Being fired from your job is bad. But the next day when the airplane hits your building and everybody that was at your job dies, then having been fired from your job was good. So what's good, what's bad, it's all blurry. The more you focus out, the more you take a wide angle lens, a wide angle view on things. So there really is no bad because the bad stuff is leading to good. So the problem is that some conscious entities are facing towards a forest of external existence, and to correct that situation, to turn those living entities around, to turn their nature around, to make them face the source rather than the effect, to face Sat rather than Asat, then they undergo these experiences that teach us that we're facing the wrong way. It's not even vindictive or punishmental. It's just the natural side effect. If you want the light to go on and you're pushing the wall next to the switch, you'll be unhappy. The light won't go on. It's not somebody punishing you. It's not some evil being wanting you to be punished. It's just a natural result of you not pressing the light switch in the right way. And then when you press the light switch in the right way, you achieve the desired result. And when you don't, you don't. So all of the suffering in the world is not somebody wanting you to suffer so that you change your existence. It's just the natural side effect of having an existence that isn't conducive to happiness. And then the question becomes, why are there entities who are focused outwardly, which we can describe as evil, since it's the source of evil? It's because there can't be any meaning to direction unless there's the other direction. There can't be a meaning to west unless there's an east. There can't be a meaning to up unless there's a down. So there can't be a meaning to focus inward unless there's a meaning to focus outward. There can't be a meaning to focus source or focus to the cause or focus to the source rather than focus to the effect. There can't be a source or a cause without the effect. So there can be no such thing as focusing the source if the source doesn't have an effect. And if there's focus towards source, there must be focus towards effect as well. And if there's focus towards effect as well, there must be some entities who are focused to effect rather than to cause. And so that's why there's some of us that exist. We think there's infinite numbers of us. But our ratio of infinitude is fairly small. But here we are, we exist, the external focused ones. And then we think, oh, we're unlucky. We're not unlucky. Why is it unlucky? We go through a very interesting set of experiences. And it would be unlucky if it would be permanent. But the ability for the conscious entity to, if they so desire, change their orientation is the kindness. How can one differentiate between someone who truly transcends delusion from someone who really doesn't give a crap because they lack empathy? So this is a very good question Devana asks. How can one differentiate between someone who's actually transcended delusion? So in other words, they don't feel affected by suffering, versus someone who doesn't give a crap because they lack empathy, because that person will still be selfish. The person who doesn't give a crap will be selfish, so you'll also find that they'll be lazy. A person who is transcended the emotions will still behave for the benefit of others and take action and make effort for the benefit of others. But it won't be motivated by their particular emotions. It'll be motivated by the rightness of being kind to others. So the person who actually transcends delusion has kindness. The person who just lacks empathy doesn't have any kindness. You guys are asking good questions today. Nadyapi vipala bahu pratiyogena sthaphopashamanim. That's a rough word. Nadyapi vipala bahu pratiyogehas tadthapa upashamani hari guru charnaravinda madhukarananupadavim avarunde. Here he suffers many failures and obstacles even to this day. Quote, right? That was an important part of the story. So he, in this first statement, what is that? Somebody's giving me a bravo. Jenny, thank you so much. In this first statement, he's giving a summary explanation of the entire story. He spent a lot of focus on the initial parts of what the things mean in the story before entering the forest. But then once entering the forest, he gives a summary of the whole thing. And then now he summarizes the way it could have ended by leaving the forest, which was mentioned in the story. In the story, it said, even to this day, he still seeks his profit. And so why is it even to this day? He's going to explain that now. The rest of the chapter is going to go into the details about the specific things that happened in the forest. But here he just gave an overview and he said all that stuff that happened is all shmashanavat ashivatmaya. It's all just upsetting and sad stuff that happened, and because that symbolizes the results of selfish action. Now he says he suffers, in this forest, he suffers many failures and obstacles. Vipala bahu pratiyogehas. Vipala bahu vipala. Many failures. Vipala means no fruit. A failure to produce the result. And pratiyoga means very many obstacles. He suffers many failures and obstacles. Na adya api. Even till today. Why is it even till today? Tat tapa upashamanim. Because he never took the medicine to cure those sufferings. Upashama. He never took the medicine. Upaya. He never fixed the remedy, utilized the remedy for that tapa, for what he had to endure. What is the remedy? It was described in the story according to Shuka as bees. or he's describing it as bees. But the word for bee is very interesting. It has a very interesting layering to the meaning. So he says, because he didn't set aside his path. I could translate this a different way. Like the way I just explained it to you, I think is simpler and better. But upashama also means to set aside his path. He didn't placate himself from that path. But it also means he didn't take the placator. He didn't take the medicine. He didn't set aside his path. What is the medicine? Following the bees at the lotus of the feet of Hari Guru. So the word for bee is madhukari. Madhu means sweet. So madhu is a word that we usually use to refer to honey. Madhu. Madhukar. Kara means to do. So madhukar means somebody who makes honey. So madhukara or kari, madhukari, is somebody who makes honey. That's a bee. So we use that word to refer to a bee. So madhu means honey, madhukari means bee. But madhukari is also a word for the sannyasi or brahmana. Somebody who's not a merchant. The opposite of the merchant. The merchant is somebody who's making money. The opposite of the merchant is somebody who stops trying to make money and just has faith or trust that he'll get what he needs from people. People will give him what he needs out of their kindness or because of destiny. Whatever he deserves, he'll get. So that person is called madhukari because just like a bee, how does a bee make honey? A bee makes honey by going to a flower and then another flower and then another flower and then another flower and then another flower. And they just take pollen from these flowers and then they collect all the pollen in one spot and it becomes honey. So a renunciate is like that because one person will give them, like Jenny. She just gave some pollen. Right? So one person will give some donation. And it's not like enough to buy a car or something, but it's a donation. And then another person will give something. And another person. So one person will give you like a little bit of rice and another person will give you some wheat and somebody else will refill your water and somebody else. I mean, maybe you can get your own water. You know what I'm saying? That's how the renunciate lives. They collect a little here, there. So they are described as bees. Which honey is just such a good food, though. So because he didn't become a bee, that's why he got stuck in the forest. Even to this day. So that is symbolic. Really, Shuka is giving a symbolism now to the part in the story where he said the only person who will survive is not the person who becomes powerful in the forest, but is the person who becomes meek in the forest. Is the only one who survives its dangers. Because the people who become powerful, they compete and fight with each other and they kill each other. But the person who becomes meek becomes ignored. And they can escape. So the person who becomes meek puts down his weapons and ceases to try to bring income, but just accepts what comes to him, is the madhukari, the bee. But now he takes the analogy, the metaphor and the analogy, and he says the madhukari goes to some kind of a flower, palam, pushpam. It goes to some kind of a pushpa. Madhu goes to pushpa, bee goes to flower. What is that pushpa? It's Aravinda, a lotus. This bee goes to a lotus. What is that lotus? It's Hari Guru Charana. It should be Hari Charana. It should be the feet of Hari. The consciousness should focus to source rather than to effect. It should focus to cause rather than to effect. So it should focus to Paramatma rather than Prakriti. So why doesn't he say Hari Charana? Hari is Paramatma, Vishnu. Because the consciousness can't find Hari Charana. Because Hari Charana is on the other side of the consciousness. Just like I can't see what's behind my head. I can see what's in front of it. Hari or Paramatma is behind. Then there's Atma, and Atma's facing this way. So how would anybody do a Hari Charana Sparsh or a Hari Charana Vandana? How can you do any surrender, or how can you find Hari's feet anywhere? You cannot. Don't fool yourself. The only way you can is if you have a mirror. Some way of seeing around to the back of you. Some camera that's pointed at the back. Something that can show you the reflection of Bhagavan in front of your face. So that's why it says Hari Guru Charana Aravinda. The bee seeks the guru, the teacher, the one who is carrying the reflective mirror that can show what's behind, where we can't see. So the way to stop suffering, this ashivatva ashmashanava, is to seek the one who knows what is the cause, not just the effect. That's the whole first verse. This kind of, the way that Shuka gave this kind of makes it more clear. Now, remember the part in the story when he went to the flowers? After hearing about this person who could escape the forest, then the merchant went to flowers where he encountered birds. When some of the birds were black and some were white. It gives a little bit of a dimension to it that actually what he was probably truly seeking was the bees. The birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees. He probably was truly seeking the bees, but instead he got sidetracked by the birds. And you can demetaphorize that riddle as well. All right. I have another one translated for you and ready to go. Thank you, Lot. So 2. Yasyam muhava ete shadindriya nam manaha karmana dashyava evate. Now he's going to talk about what happened, some specifics of what happened in the forest and what those specifics meant. Remember the first thing that happened when the merchant entered the forest? He attracted 6 friends that turned out to be rogues and stole all his money. This merchant had some money with him. Oh, this merchant had money. This merchant was wealthy. He's a merchant. And then he went into the forest with his money. And then the 6 rogues in the forest stole his money. And he had to live in the bushes. That's what happened in the story. What does that symbolize? He's going into the forest seeking money, but he already has riches. Murk, fool. He already has riches, but he's going into the forest seeking money. And those unknown riches that he has, what happens when he gets in the forest? Those rogues, they know about it. They trick him and take it, while looking like friends. Wolves in sheep's clothing, it was said. So now he explains now who those 6 robbers are. Shad Indriya Namna Karmana. The actions of the 6 senses. The 6 rogues are the actions of the 6 senses. Do you know there's 6 senses? Yes, because there's a movie with, I forget his name, it's The Sixth Sense. And everybody knows the 6th sense is the mind. So there's the 5 senses, and there's also the 6th sense. What's the 6th sense for? For seeing ghosts? Not really. The 6th sense is for seeing emotions. So those actions are what steals the wealth of the soul. They take the soul's happiness and use it for themselves. We think that a nice warm pot of soup makes us happy on a cold winter's morning, or a nice hot cup of coffee or chai. But it's not the coffee or the chai or the soup that makes us happy. It's our own internal happiness, which is taken out of us and used by the taste buds and the nose to make us happy. So the senses are taking the wealth out of the soul, sticking it into their perceptions, and then telling us that happiness comes from them, thus making us feel indebted to them and making us want to befriend them. Tadyata. Why are the six senses described as six rogues who steal? I explained it a little bit. Now Shuk will explain it more. Tadyata purushasya dhanam yat kinchid dharma opayikam bahukrichadigatam sakshat parama purusharadana lakshana yasau dharmastham tu samparaya udaharanti. That's because a person works hard as if they were trying to worship the Supreme Person to earn whatever honest money they can, hoping to sustain themselves through to the end of their lives. Tad dharmyam dhanam darshana sparshana shravana svadana vagrahana sankalpa vyavasaya griha gramyopabhogena kunathasyajitatmana. But their own uncontrolled mind and faulty logics trick them into spending this sacred wealth on attempts to enjoy the sights and sounds and tastes and touches and smells of their town and their home. So he gives an intermediate decoding of the story. The metaphor in the story is that these six robbers attacked him, looking like his friends, acting like his friends. They attack him and steal his money. They continuously steal his money. They continuously accompany him and steal his money throughout his existence in the forest. So he says, on one level of decoding this is, what does it mean that you steal? He says, look, just like people work very hard to earn money, how hard do we work to earn money? From Shuka's point of view, he says, they're working as if they were trying to worship the Supreme Person. Sakshat Parama Purushat Aradhana Lakshana. The Lakshana, it has the quality as if Sakshat Parama Purushartha Aradhana. Parama Purusharadhana. It has the quality as if they were worshipping the Supreme Person. The amount of effort that we put into making money. It's so much effort. And to Shuka, it seems like they're putting the same amount of effort into this as it takes to worship the Supreme Person. It's a lot of work. Bahukritcha. There's a lot of difficulty in earning money. Taxes. Laws. Bookkeeping. Store hours, working, laboring, not being able to do other things, dealing with customers. There's a lot of kritcha, a lot of difficult stuff. But from that hard work, adhigatam dhanam, some money comes. Somehow, sometimes some amount, kinchid dhanam. And why did we want to make all that money, really? Because samprayana udaharanti. Because we need to take care of ourselves. We need to keep ourselves alive, samprayana, and we need to think about our old age when we won't be able to work. When people won't be paying us money, when we'll just be lying in bed. So we need to think about that old age, so we need to save up some money. So we work really hard to save up money and have, before we get to a certain age, let's make sure we have a house, and let's make sure that everything is okay, and we paid off all our loans, and we paid off all our bills, so that when we're old, it's okay. That's why we work really hard. But what actually happens to the money? Are beti, what actually happens to this money? Their own uncontrolled mind is our fault. It is not the fault of the robbers. Don't blame the robbers. Blame yourself. It's your fault for believing these people. They're scammers. Dashiva. Good word for them, scammers. It's our fault for falling victim to a scam. Of course, it's the scammer's fault. But in the actuality, the senses are inanimate. They don't have a will. They're not trying to do anything. So although in the analog, in the analogy, maybe they have some culpability, but in the reality of what this thing is analog to, the senses have no will. They are just instruments. It is entirely our fault. So it's because of our own ajita, atmana, the fact that we are not in control of ourselves. And we have kunnata, bad logics, bad decisions. All logic is always just facilitating our illogic. All of our logic is just facilitating our illogical stuff. Justification after justification after justification. We were complete assholes, but it's okay. Because in that lifetime, in this lifetime, in that time, and 6 months ago and 3 months ago, this person did that and this person did that. So much logic, so much bad logic. All of our bad logic is just serving our uncontrolled selves, and therefore, because we're uncontrolled, we fall victim to scams. And what is the scam? That the griha and the gramya can be bhoga. That we can enjoy the home and the town. Upabhoga. You can't even touch these things. They're just energies in a Higgs field that you just believe is pizza. Or you believe it's your favorite band. Or you believe it's your smiling child. But we think we can enjoy all those things through touching, smelling, tasting, etc. Those 6 actions. Sankalpa could actually be the 6th action. But their own uncontrolled mind and faulty logic tricks them into spending their money. So what happens to the money that we saved up for our retirement? We spend it on the restaurants. We spend it on the subscription to Netflix and Hulu and Hotstar. We spent it on PS5 and PS4 and PS3 and PS2 and PS1 and Nintendo 64 and Atari 2600. We spent it on iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. We spent all this money chasing the happiness that was already inside of us, that got stolen and put into something outside of us and says, here, come and get it, but you have to pay for it. Yata sartasya vilambati. That's why they are plunderers of the merchant. That's why the six senses are described as plunderers of the merchant. Isn't that beautiful? This is beautiful in an ugly way, beautifully accurate. So these are the first two statements of Shukdev, explaining what that riddle was. I'll just read you this part of the story that he's explained so far. Of course, he explained the whole entire story in a nutshell, but in particular, he described the first two texts. So he described a profit-seeking merchant is looking for ways to increase income, reduce expense, and save himself, finding a very dangerous road. But look at the Nishevita. Niveshita means vasyata. He's being forced into it, or he falls upon this road. See, this is so specific, so to work on it in a second language is really difficult. A profit-seeking merchant is looking for ways to increase income, reduce expense, and sustain himself. Finding a very dangerous road, he enters it, driven by delusion. Traversing it fearfully, he wanders into the wilderness of existence. Misguided and bewildered by his desires. So it seems like Shukadev is actually adding some details. Misguided and bewildered by his desires, 6 rogues plunder him, like wolves dressed as cows to steal sheep. That's what he's spoken about so far. Okay, that was super good. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Let me see if there's questions here. Vana, why then are we trapped by the effects of the 6 and get addicted? Then we do our karma, even addicted to our minds. Correct. Nomadic, is it in the jiva's nature to be born ignorant in the world, or is this not so? It is in the nature. Alf, I sometimes think... I understand. I sometimes think if we ever met and talked in a coffee shop, the world will turn into neon green numbers. Okay, my friends, thanks very much for joining today. Stay tuned. Next week, same day, you'll get Shukadev giving you the next explanations. Have a great weekend. Jenny, sorry.